Welcome, folks, to your Reality Gurus, a show where we take a commonsensical approach to issues through complex conversation. I'm your host, CLEVE, and check this out, man. Make sure you check out that youtube.com/reality guru show. Consider subscribing. Folks, I got a good guru interview for you today. Got my man, Real Talk, the Black Boy King. Real Talk, what's up, buddy? How you been, man?
What's going on? What's going on? Peace to the earth. What's going on with y'all, family?
Yeah, listen, man, it's about time we finally got an opportunity to sit down and chat, man. I know you do music, I know you're a recording artist, but you wanted to go ahead and put that to the side for a little bit and get into some of this black consciousness, right? So, folks, you know how we do. Let's check out the synopsis. So let's back up real quick, man. So where you from, brother? Talk to me.
Right now, I'm from Dallas, Texas, but originally I spent a lot of time out on the West Coast. Just came back from LA where I was wrapping up the album, but I got family out there, and I grew up out there too in Vegas. So LA, Vegas, Phoenix, now here at home in Dallas, Texas.
Gotcha. Okay, let's get into the real stuff, man. When did you come into your consciousness? Like, when did you get woke? At what point did you come into your consciousness, man, and start really thinking about, what it is that we go through here and what it is that we're experiencing here? Like, talk to me. When did you first get into that?
Really say pretty much my whole life, but really as far as who we are as a people and why these things are happening, I want to say around 2014, 2015. But up until that point, I grew up, and we talked about it a little bit. I grew up, lived in the projects for a little while down in Florida, the Conant Gardens projects. So I got a chance to see, firsthand, crack dealing, murder, police brutality. There was a police officer that was the mainstay of brutality in the projects that we lived in. And so my mom, I grew up in a house where my mom was a Panther, 60s and 70s. She was really big in the movement. She held rallies and sit-ins on the University of Michigan campus. So she always told us who we are from her growing up and her level of knowledge that she had at the time, because there wasn't no internet back then. So she had books and everything that she would pass down to me and my brother. So I always knew we was a special people, but I knew in the back of my mind somewhere, something happened. Yeah. And it just didn't make sense that we could dunk a basketball, we could run touchdowns, we could sing, we could do everything, all these different black inventors that invented everything, but we were at the bottom of society. Mm-hmm. So around 2014, 2015, I call it being, quote unquote, being touched by God, but I just felt like, one day, it was right after, I believe it was Mike Brown, when Mike Brown got shot. I think that was 2015, right? I think it was 2015, Mike Brown got shot.
Right.
It was a big deal on the news and everything, and it just really triggered me like, man, this continues to happen to us with these police. And so I went to an area where I had never been before, which was the Bible. And prior to that, like, I was no Christian, no any of that, because I thought, basically what everybody else thinks was that, that book is for white folks. But then when I opened it up and I read it and I was going through chapter by chapter, I realized, wait a minute, the description of this people in this book is us. And then it wasn't until I really got to, Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verses 15 through 68, where it lists generational curses that would afflict a certain people if they did not obey the commandments given to Moses by God on the Mount Sinai. Mm-hmm. And when I read through it, each and every last curse was like, wow, that's us. And then when I got to verse 68, where it said God would send his people back into bondage again on ships, it was like, come on, man, we the only people on the planet Earth that went into slavery on ships, so this got to be us. Gotcha. So that kind of led me down my journey, and then I started doing more studying, and ever since then, I've just been in one book after the other, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Gotcha. Now, it's interesting that you say that your mother was a Panther, man. As far as my consciousness is concerned, man, fairly recent as you, but I didn't have any relatives that were, dealing with civil rights and dealing with the movement like you have. So what was it like coming up with a mother who was part of the Black Panthers?
It was interesting, man, because when we left the projects, my mom was working like 2-3 jobs to keep us in the suburbs, to keep us away from that crime. And I got a chance to see both sides of how both people live. I got a chance to see how, the rich people was living, and, I'm living in an apartment, my mom working several jobs keep the lights on, but I'm going to school with kids that their parents is doctors and lawyers, and they got big houses.
Right.
And I got a chance to see versus where I came from in the projects. My mom was always reminding me and telling me who I was and stay grounded. This is who you are as a people. Don't be blinded by what those other kids have. That's not you. This is where you come from. So she was putting books off in me and my brother's hands. Like, one of the big ones was The Destruction of Black Civilization. And I read that in high school, probably like around 8th, 9th grade. I read that book. And then, it was just really Black power all the time. My mom was celebrating Black history and all that. So it was just always in the top of my mind that we were a special people, and that we had a lot of work to do as a people in this country.
Now, I hear you keep talking about special people, 12 tribes of Israel. Explain to me how, because I'm pretty sure a lot of the listeners, their knowledge base as far as this information here is probably limited. So explain to me how that information that you've come across ties into what it is that's going on with us Black people here in this country today.
Great question. So, we've been in this country going on nearly actually almost 500 years. But we are constantly bombarded with imagery, movies, and textbook information that all we are slaves. All we ever were slaves from Africa, and they've kind of pounded that in our mind frame that we're just slaves from Africa. They don't tell us where in Africa we come from. They don't tell us what empire, what kingdom, what our culture was. Right? Other nations of people come here from other places. They have bad things happen to them, but their identity is not stripped from them. Where our people, we had our identity stripped from us, and we were beaten into submission as far as forgetting who we were.
Right.
And then on top of that, we had the identity of our captors implanted on us. And so where this history of the 12 tribes comes into play is because we've been taught as a nation of people for so long that the Christian religion of, white Jesus and certain parts cherry-picked from the Bible created a religion that we're adhering to now is something separate from who we are. But when you go into it, you realize, wait a minute, number one, this book is not talking about what the Christian church is talking about. Mm-hmm. And the Jesus of this book is not the same Jesus in the church. So then, okay, well, what is it talking about? And when you start reading through the book, page by page, line upon line, as the book says you're supposed to do, you're supposed to read it line upon line. You're not supposed to skip anything. You'll realize that it's a history book. Mm-hmm. It's a history book of a people that at one time had their own nation, their own kingdom, their own royal court, their own lineage of people, their own culture, laws, banking system, navy, army, pretty much everything that any functioning society would have. These people had that, and those people match up the exact description of who we are. And the sad part about it is I've been all over the world. I've been in Europe, you know what I'm saying? I've been in the Caribbean, I've been all over the world. And I've been to the Middle East too. Actually, I was in the Middle East last year. Mm-hmm. The rest of the world knows this. And so when you go and you talk to other people and they know that you're the lost sheep and they're looking at you and they're waiting for you to wake up and get it, they're just as surprised to know that we don't know that we're the lost sheep. When I was in the Middle East, I was in Jordan last year. And I was in Palestine. I was in Palestine on the other side of the wall in the war zone, fam.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so
how was that?
Man, it was unbelievable. I mean, you go through Israel, you go through the checkpoints, because I was in the Holy Land. I wanted to, walk the land of our ancestors to see where our land was, right?
Right.
And when you're there, you realize, okay, these people that are claiming to be Jewish people, they don't fit none of the actual descriptions or prophecies of the actual Jewish people that's written in the Bible. Mm. And when you go there and you chop it up with Palestinians, they know this. And that's one of the reasons why there's tension and conflict there, is that they know those people are not the real people and they want them off the land. Mm. And what they didn't know is that they didn't know that we didn't know we're the people. And when you talk to them, you tell them that they're just as surprised because they thought we knew. And we're just waiting for God to come save us and put us back in the land. They didn't know that we didn't know. But they're over there right now begging us to wake up to our true identity, which is happening by the tens of thousands around the world every single day. I mean, you could just go on YouTube and see people talking about it. You got a few crazy people out there that's kind of, making a bad name out of it. And that's why we talk. I said, we don't play the guilt by association game. I'm not associated with any of these crazy cats on the streets that's yelling at people.
Right.
That's a whole different story for another conversation.
Right.
But the reality of the truth is that the rest of the world knows who we are or we don't. And that's how we fit the description of the quote unquote lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Got you. Well, folks, we're here with Real Talk, the Black Boy King. We're sitting here having a conversation about the lost tribes, 12 lost tribes of Israel. And he's really opening up the conversation because I've been interested in this for a little while. Interesting that you mentioned about those guys that you see on the streets yelling and stuff. That's pretty much what's burned into my brain when we start getting into this topic. But so now, how do you determine who actually comes from this bloodline? Are we just talking about black people in this country, or is there, like, for instance, you do know that as of recent, shout out Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore with the American Descendants of Slavery, that movement. So are we talking about descendants of slaves in this country who come from that bloodline, or because we have a whole bunch of different types of black people here in this country?
Absolutely.
Who falls
Absolutely.
Who falls into that bloodline?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because the 12 tribes are 12 distinct types of Israelites. But one thing in common is genetically, we're all possessing the E1B1A DNA haplogroup. And we're the only people on the planet that do that. So out of the 12 tribes, the fourth tribe, which is the tribe of Judah, which is the regal class of the Israelites. We were the kings that passed down the lineage into the marriages, King David, King Solomon, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. So if your ancestors, and you could trace this now, like for a DNA test and then followed up by the Library of Congress research, they have all the slave records there. And I was able to track my lineage back. My slave ancestor came from Ghana and was a member of the Ashanti tribe. And when you look at the Ashanti tribe's history, the Ashanti tribe was stemmed from the tribe of Judah, and going back thousands of years when the tribes left Israel, when Rome destroyed Israel in 70 AD. So I would say 90% of the people on West Africa, which is where those Israelites fled to into Africa, because they knew that the white Romans would not be able to tell the difference between a native African and an Israelite because of our dark complexion.
Right.
We settled in West Africa and set up the kingdom of Timbuktu and several other kingdoms in that area, in Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, the different places like that. And the Ashantis were one of those Hebrew tribes that sprung from the tribe of Judah. Mm-hmm. So if you can trace your lineage back to the transatlantic slave trade through those records from West Africa, and they even have slave maps published now from the 1700s and 1600s, it even says on those slave maps, Negro land and New Kingdom of Judah in those areas. So those slavers know exactly where to go to get those people from that specific tribe.
That's interesting.
Now, when you're talking about the 11 other tribes of dark-skinned melanated people that dwelt with us in one kingdom in Israel before the Romans destroyed it, they were spread out several hundred years before we were sent down into Africa. And around, I would say around 500 BC, the Babylonians conquered the kingdom of Israel and conquered Jerusalem. And so during that time, one of the Babylonian kings named Shalmaneser, he built several hundred ships to ship the 11 other tribes out of the kingdom of Israel to get them scattered across the earth. And so they made a pact and said, we will go to where a place we can keep our commandments and our culture and start fresh and new. And that land was called Arsareth in the Bible. The Bible mentions a land where no mankind dwelt that took a year and a half to sail from. And so if you map it out, sailing through the Strait of Hormuz down into Africa, underneath Africa to the Western Hemisphere, North and South America, these 11 tribes ultimately became the Olmecs, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Native Americans, the Cherokees, the Choctaws, all the different dark-skinned tribes of people from North and South America during that time were the 11 other tribes, including the islanders like your Tongans, your Samoans, and your Fijians. If you look at old ancient pictures of these people, they're as black as tar and have woolly hair. And even some of the Fijians that are around now, you look at people from Fiji, they're Negroid people with woolly hair. And so that's a key indicator that they belong to one of the other 11 tribes. In addition to that, you look at their ancient history and their culture, they do a lot of things that are consistent with the laws of Moses, like refraining from eating pork, wearing fringes on their outfits. You've seen plenty of those Native American pictures where they just fringed out everywhere on their shoulders and on the bottom and everything. That's one of our customs that's listed in the law of Moses in the Old Testament. And then with Native Americans, you see a lot of old artifacts that are written in ancient Hebrew, the Paleo-Hebrew language, most specifically the name of the Most High, which is Yahweh, or Yah for short, is written in Paleo-Hebrew and old Native American artifacts. So that's really how you can tell. There's big debate amongst the community in regards to that, but all you have to do is look at the artifacts, and that's why I'm big on traveling, because I can go and look at the artifacts with my own eyes and do the research.
So now so you possibly have some skeptics. So what separates you from that guy we see standing on the corner and with the bullhorn, and he seems to be, or they seem to be educating, but there's a lot of divisiveness. Tell me tell the people what differentiates you from those types of individuals.
No doubt. So what separates me is the fact that I study. A lot of those brothers don't study. They've learned a doctrine. They are what we call being intellectually lazy. And what that means is just the same as you would see a Christian go to church on Sunday and worship a white Jesus, and you pick the book up and you show them that Jesus was not white. Here's his description right here as a black man. And then you show them that the Sabbath is on Saturday, not Sunday. But they still go back into the church and do the same thing over and over again. It's because they are intellectually lazy. They don't want to study. And the Lord tells you, study to show yourself approved. And so these men have been misguided by some very evil individuals. And that comes with the territory. Because again, us so-called black people in America have to remember that we are at war. We are captives of war. We're not innocent bystanders that this is just happening to. We are in a war with our enemies. In the book of Deuteronomy, the Lord said he would spread us into the land of our enemies. And so we've been at a war for a long time, and it's the war for the throne of controllership of the earth. We had it at one time, we lost it, and the book says we'll get it once again when all things come recompense, meaning all the injustices of throughout time against us as a people will get paid back. And so the brothers on the street corner, they are being taken advantage of by the enemy who have people on the payroll. 9 times out of 10, and I know a lot of people will probably backlash, but 9 times out of 10, these are funded by Freemasons who have an active agenda into pretty much turning the Israelite movement, which was prophesied to happen regardless, because the Lord said he would wake his people up in the end time, and we're seeing that right now. But they're doing that in order to have the same effect it had on you, which was when somebody types in, hey, I heard we're the Jews, and we're typing in on Google, we're seeing these clowns act and behave the way they're acting, right. And it'll turn you off from that truth, and you'll go back to thinking that you are black, that you are American, and everything is just normal. This is just our culture of, killing each other, robbing and stealing, and then, so on and so forth. And we continue this cycle of being a captive in enemy territory while they maintain rulership over us.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, long story short, that's really what it is that they're unlearned individuals. I feel bad for a lot of them because it's just like gang culture. They come from fatherless homes. They don't have good male role models. So they see this brother dressed in this outfit on the street corner, and he's talking with power and conviction, and he knows the Bible backwards and forwards, but the devil always puts 1% lie and 99% truth. And when you study the book and you know what it is the book says and you know the history, you can spot the lie like it's nothing. And that's been my journey, is I listen to him talk, and it's like, you're saying this, but here's what the book says. And we have to go by what the book says. And so that's why you see the divisiveness is because, one, they're yelling at people. And Jesus Christ told us specifically that we're in the end times. It's time to let people just be. If a man be unrighteous, let him be unrighteous. If he be filthy, let him be filthy. That's saying, do you let your light shine. And the ones that are meant to see and hear this knowledge, they'll come to you and say, yo, fam, teach me what you learning, right? So they already off kilter with that knowledge. And then on top of it, it's kind of like, they just want to be part of that group. They want to have that brotherhood, and, they want to be down with a team rather than actually studying what it is who we are, and having respect and living according to these commandments.
Right. Okay. So, all right. Pretty interesting. So let me ask this again, folks. We're here with Real Talk, the Black Boy King, really getting deep into some real conscious stuff here. But let's ask this question, man, because now we're going to fast forward to like present day, and kind of try to now have the conversation on how does this information that you're providing now help us understand, who we are, what we are, and how we're supposed to survive and move forward here in this country. Another interview I was having when he was bringing up the Freddie Gray incident, partner Della of mine, and that was the trigger for him to start focusing on doing things in his community, and really trying to do some activism. You brought up some incidents as well. You have some roots in L.A. We know we just recently there was a sheriff out there that actually shot a kid about 30 times or so out there. You had your Nipsey Hussle situation. A lot of the things with black men, a lot of challenges that we have here in this country. How is getting this information you provide now help us navigate through all of this bullshit?
Because we as a people have to understand that the longer we continue to call ourselves quote unquote black, which is a color, it's a crayon color. There is no nation of black. There's no kingdom of black. There's no president of black. There's no seat at the UN for a black. That is a name given to us by our captors, by our enemy, to label us. And it's been a word used throughout time to describe something. It's an adjective. White people call themselves white because that is how they view themselves, as pure. So as long as we continue to identify with labels that have been given to us by our captors, instead of coming to the realization of what our actual identity, culture, heritage, and rules of conduct are as a people, we'll continue to suffer this punishment. And that's exactly what the Bible says. Whether we want to accept it or not, we have laws, statutes, and commandments. We are a civilized people. When the European, when we were ruling Europe during the time of the Moors, and even before the time of the Moors, when it was Hebrew Israelite kings over England, Germany, France, and I've shown you several of these pictures and artifacts of this time frame. We ruled based on laws and rules of conduct. And while the Caucasian man or the other races of people were living savagely, they did not bathe, they did not clean their food, they did not wash their hands. They killed indiscriminately. They had no rules of conduct. We were the civilizers of the world. So what happened is that since we've had that stripped away from us, and we now have adopted the identity that was given to us by our captors, we consistently in every community suffer from a range of psychological problems that impact every aspect of what we do. Now, mind you, there's always been a small percentage of us that have been kind of awakened, so to speak. If you remember in the movie Django, Leonardo DiCaprio's character called Jamie Foxx Bright Boy. Because there's always been 1 in 10,000, as they like to say, that kind of just gets it. And that individual throughout time has had the ability to either do good with that knowledge or do bad. And so that's why, we have our Magic Johnsons who are successful in athletics and business. We have our Jay-Z's who are successful in music and business, but as a culture, as a people, we cannot get on the same level or above where we're supposed to be at with the other races and do proper commerce with business, proper policing of ourselves in our own community, protecting our women and children from outside threats without a unified system of rules and conduct. And that's what this knowledge brings to you, is that, number one, you find out who you are. Things like Islam can show you the rules of conduct, but it'll not show you who you are. You have a mind frame of, okay, this must be the black man's religion because it's not Christianity, but it doesn't tell you who you are. When you come into the knowledge of being an Israelite, you get the knowledge of not only who you are, but what your history is, and it takes you throughout time. And that's why I encourage every black man and woman, so-called black man and woman, is to travel. Stop spending your money on Gucci and things that don't matter. One of my songs I talk about, you spent $200 on a pair of shoes, you a fucking fool. Excuse my language, but that was the lyrics I used. It's because you should be wanting to travel and go see, because the rest of the world, when you visit these places, they will tell you to your face, you are the child of God. God chose your people. You are the people that was freed from slavery in Egypt. And so when we know this, we go, okay, we're the children of God. What what is my culture? Okay, my culture is the 10 Commandments for starters. You know, how hard is it really to not kill, not murder, not steal, not sleep with someone else's woman, and not desecrate the Sabbath day? You know, we get that day as rest, but we always talking about grinding. Slavery, we working 7 days a week, right? So when you look at the 10 Commandments, that's just the starters. There's 613 laws. A lot of them have to do with how we conduct business with one another, you know, mortgages, things like that. It's all covered in there. Lending to one another, how we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to clean ourselves, how women are supposed to keep their body clean, especially during that time of the month. All these rules and laws are civilized in the book. And so when you look at our community, you look at our quote unquote culture here in America, as we continue to call ourselves Black, our culture is made up of rap music, which is programming the youth to accept complete chaos. Every song is about stealing someone's girl. That's breaking a commandment. Why you want to steal someone's girl, right? But it's put forth in a way that sounds cool, and this beat is hard, man. The lyrics is tight, but he's talking about going against your own rules of conduct that was set aside for you as far as behavior, killing, robbing, stealing, so on and so forth. We have to realize that we're absorbing and perpetuating the enemy's plan for them. They no longer have to do it to us like in slavery. They programmed us to where we're doing it to ourselves. And that's why the knowledge of being an Israelite and who we are as a true people gives you that sense of empowerment to where you can have a rulership mentality and really start as far as being a king of your life, being a king in your household. And then if we're all doing that together, the Lord says he will make us kings of the earth once again.
This is pretty deep, man, folks. Real talk. Black Boy King, he's really going in right now. You know, and moving on a little more. You mentioned Jay-Z, you mentioned Magic, you mentioned some of these celebrities out here. I have some people that are in my circle that feel like black celebrities are a big problem. Because when we look at their lives, and us as black people here in this country, if we view ourselves through the lives of these black celebrities, recipe for disaster, right? So, I mean, just talking about this unification thing, I need to understand this question now. How do you feel about Pan-Africanism?
To me, it's a lofty goal, but at the same time, it's very misguided, because without the education of who we really are and what really happened to us and how we're different from Native Africans, the Pan-African movement is something that kind of just perpetuates that cycle. Because Marcus Garvey, he had a great plan. He had a great idea. And it was, to get us all back to Africa and to unite. But there's a reason why that didn't work. Obviously, one of them being spiritual, because the Lord said during this time of captivity, we should only be relying on him and not another man. No man will save us is pretty much what the Lord said. But secondly is because, like I mentioned, the descendants of slaves and the other 11 tribes, we're not African. We are melanated Negroid people that lived in Africa because we had to flee our homeland in Israel in 70 AD. When the Romans went about conquering the world, they conquered the biggest prize of them all, which was Jerusalem. And that was during the time of Christ. It was 70 years after Christ. After they murdered Christ, 70 years later, they killed over 3 million of our people and sent another 2-3 million into Africa to flee. And then another 1 to 2 million fled into Europe and became those Israelite kings that I told you about.
Right.
But without that level of understanding, you'll never understand that's why we'll never come together, because the native African who lives in Africa right now, he knows who he is. A native Kenyan knows he is from Kenya. He is not the same as a Nigerian. A Nigerian is not the same as, someone from Botswana. Someone from Botswana is not the same as someone from Senegal. They're all different types of Africans with different DNA, different cultures, and again, different rules and standards of conduct. They know their history, whether it's passed down verbally or written. They know their history. They know they are the sons of Ham from the time of Noah's flood, which the family tree in the Bible, it has that. Ham is the land of Africa, and all his sons pretty much spread out and took different parts of Africa. We are the sons of Shem. We took over the northeastern part of Africa and then parts of the Middle East where Israel is at. That was our land. So knowing that, we know there's 54 countries in Africa, which which country do we come from if we're African, right? Which African country do we come from? There's 3,000 different ethnic races there that speak over 2,500 languages.
So I found out.
Yeah, which one of these do we all speak, right? And so when we talk about DNA, we talk about nationhood, we talk about culture, we know that there's no way to unify. And then the big hammer that we talked about earlier that hits the nail on the head is when we were going on those slave ships and suffering this immense torture and hurtful time period in our history, why is it that none of these other 54 nations came and got us? It should have been a 100 to 200 year warfare against the European slavers to get their ancestors back and reteach us who we were and welcome us back in. But what we see today is that the native African and a lot of people who live in big cities like LA, here in Dallas, New York, Chicago, those native Africans have this same level of disdain for us as the white European or the Asian Chinese or any of the other races that don't like us. And there's a reason for that. And it boils down to what I mentioned earlier about us being a different people from them. And when you look at the history of that, you see records of them selling us into slavery to the native or to the European white man. And that's why white people like to throw it in our face by saying, black sold blacks into slavery. Well, yeah, that sounds smart when you don't know that there's different types of black people. Right. And we were warring against each other for supremacy of that continent.
Right. Well, okay, so you're opening up another conversation because when I talk to these brothers about, these topics and stuff, they always bring it back to white supremacy. White supremacy is the reason for all of this. But if you're saying that some of these nations in Africa who are responsible for selling a certain type of melanated individual into slavery, are we now blaming white supremacy now? Are we now focusing on some of these nations in Africa? Are they the ones who should be held responsible?
A lot of the Pan-African brothers, too, have to do some studying on the 13 tribes of Israelites that are still in Africa to this day. When I talk to Pan-African brothers, I ask them, I say, do you know about the Ethiopian Falasha? Do you know about the Abu Yadaya, the Tutsi, the Rosape, the Limba, the Sepwe Waiwaso, the Ashanti, the Yu, the Benai Ephraim, the Lam, the Katsena, the Zephraim Ibrahim, and the Igbo tribes. Those are the 13 tribes, are the remaining descendants of the Israelites who luckily did not go on slave ships and get scattered. They're still in Africa and they still keep the Torah. They still wear fringes and they still celebrate the holidays of the Bible and refrain from celebrating holidays like Christmas, Easter, things that are outside the Bible that have nothing to do with our Messiah. So when you ask Pan-Africans this question, there's always a blank stare because they haven't done the research.
Right.
What they've done is they've romanticized and fallen in love with an idea of black unity. But you can't have black unity because black is not a nationality, it's not a kingdom, it's not a nation, and it's not a culture. It's a label put on you people by your slaver captors or your enemies in warfare. And that is where we have to get out of this mind frame if we want to ascend to the proper levels of consciousness to where we can actually really do come together and solve these problems we have in our community. Yeah. Like, when we talk about, things that we see, we know it's not right. We see, our women, beautiful women wearing blonde wigs and acting a fool and on reality TV shows. And we say, what has happened to our sisters? And we think, man, Dr. King, he rolling in his grave, man. Look at how we acting like Malcolm X, man. They wasn't trying to do this. Right. And it's because we have gotten comfortable as a people with what our enemies have put on us. And I'm telling every black person that's listening to this right now, every descendant of slaves, every Israelite, they are laughing at us. There are some friendly ones, right? There are some friendly, the Bible calls them Gentiles. There are friendly Gentiles who are down for us and they want to see us get back to who we were. And they will happily be second and third place to us in the hierarchy of the rulership of the earth. Their own people call them race traitors. And you know it. You hear the neo-Nazis, they call you a race traitor. Right. But the majority of them, the elitists who run the world, they laugh at us, man. And that's why they pump trillions of dollars into misinformation campaigns, hip hop, gangster rap music, bad images of us on television, the news media only covering the bad things we do, and suppressing the history that we have and keeping you as far away from it as possible. When I traveled the world and I seen these museums and these artifacts, I realized that why isn't any of this in the West? Why can't you go into a museum in LA and see a picture of Black King Charles V, right, Holy Roman Emperor over all of Europe? Why you don't see that? There's pictures everywhere in Europe. And that's why I call myself the Black Boy King, is because King Charles II of England was known as the Black Boy King of England. And there's still in Wales to this day a bar that is called the Black Boy Inn, and it commemorates Black King Charles II. It's been there since the 1500s. So that just tells me they know, okay, that's far away from where an American Black man will ever go. Right. He'll never go over there and see that. Over here in America, we got to keep telling them that they niggas, that they're Black, they're African-American, Afro-American, so on and so forth. And that's kind of what my point is to all of this, is that when you read the Bible and you see that God said this will be our punishment, you have to have a real talk with yourself, and you have to have a real talk with our community. And I'm afraid that our people are not ready to have that real talk, that we messed up as a civilization. We're suffering the punishment for it. But in order for us to get out of this cycle, we have to accept the fact that we have a culture, we have rules, we have standards, we have ways of conduct. And it's contrary to the American way of doing things. And if we are as a people, so in love with the way America does this, we love the money, we love the cars, we love the clothes, we love the club, we love shining, we love stunting. You know what I'm saying? We love that as a people. And that's why it's hard for us when you say, hey, man, don't eat that bacon, man. We got rules of conduct. That's not a food that we eat. We don't eat pig meat. We don't eat crab and lobster. That's not for our DNA. Wow. That's where you get the backlash. Like, oh, man, come on, man. It's just bacon, dog. It's so good.
How does learning this knowledge, this history, help us with understanding how we navigate through some of this shit today?
It gives you insight into, number one, why did it happen? You're dealing with your enemy. The Lord said he would send his enemies against us, and they would not regard women, children, men, young and old. So that's a primary example of our enemy having no regard for the young by putting free cases on young children. And because they weren't given the law, statutes, and commandments to follow, they broke the commandment of playing false witness. So Linda Fairstein was a false witness against these children. And then, unfortunately, those children had to suffer one of the curses of our children being handed on to another people, as well as our children being put into prison houses and having roofs of brass and cages of iron around us. So when you know why these things are happening, and then you say, okay, now I know who I am, I know why these things are happening to us continually, then you look at, okay, what am I supposed to do? And that's where the commandments come into play. When you start keeping these commandments, you start conducting yourself in a certain way, you start taking more ownership of your own personal behavior. Therefore, you start taking ownership of your household's behavior. And you are able to protect your children by giving them knowledge and pass down knowledge, learning from the mistakes of others to prevent these things from happening in the future. You noticed in that docuseries, one of the main themes that the reason why those children were in their circumstances is because they had no real strong parental guidance at home. They really only touched on a couple of the fathers, right, but the father figures were portrayed as more or less weak. If you know, John Leguizamo's character, even when he married the new woman, he was simping out to her. I mean, no disrespect. I'm just saying it was portrayed in that manner, that he was under her control and command rather than the control and command of his own house. And then the one brother who I can't remember his name,
Omar from The Wire. Omar from The Wire. Yeah.
He was in the same situation where he was cool with his son, but did he have real command over his household to prevent his son from going off and being in that type of activity? And so we see in our Black communities that we don't have fathers, and the women, our poor women, are left to raise boys and try to raise men, which cannot happen. So what ends up happening is our youth are running wild with no true guidance and understanding on what is right, what is wrong, what is proper conduct, what is proper behavior. And so you remember during that time period in the 90s, it was called wilding out. Like that was a term, you wilding, man, you wilding. Right. Why? Because people was running around in packs. Like, that's unacceptable behavior, right? So because we haven't learned from the lessons of people who've made mistakes, we've actually made it a culture of going to prison, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, unfortunately. So when you have this knowledge of not only who you are, you could pass that knowledge down to your son and say, son, this is who we are. Daughter, this is who we are. This is our culture. This is how we conduct ourselves. Because a child is a blank slate.
Right.
He's going to do whatever you teach him. So if you teach him from the beginning of who he is, who his ancestors were, and what the rules of behavior and conduct are for his culture, he will be able to pass that down to his children. And we can see a drastic change within 1 to 2 generations if we all just simply adopt a singularity identity of who we are and a singularity in our rules of conduct and behavior. But the problem is that because we are under this trauma-based mind control of our enemy, it's hard to do because we don't have the family structure in the house to keep it there. So that's the biggest takeaway from the Central Park 5 was those unfortunate men had to suffer that punishment because of their environment lacking the institutional structure, the leadership in the household, and the rulership mentality of the community. You know, we know better than that. Even if we look at so-called African culture, it takes a village to raise a child.
Right.
We don't do that anymore. It's every man for himself, and it plays out day by day by day. And so what happens is you have children running wild throughout the community, and the police are not there to solve crimes.
Right.
I hope Black people can understand this by now. That
they don't.
When you pick that phone up and call a police officer, that's a bill. It costs money for that cop to come out there and deal with you. So they already don't like you. The police department was formed as the old slave catchers brigade. So they're trained and programmed to think of you as an animal. So you're not going to get help from your enemy. That's another thing that we have to understand. So when they show up to a crime scene, their thinking process is, we have to close this case and I'm going to put it on somebody. Somebody's going to jail. Just like if you have a domestic dispute and your woman calls the police, somebody's going to jail. It ain't going to be no reasoning with the police. Someone's going to jail.
Indeed.
And that's what happened with that situation there is you have a bloodthirsty woman who already does not like you. Then you have a system set up around her that does not like you. And they are on a time clock. And one of the things she said in that docuseries, when you watch it, you got to listen to what people say. She said, we are on a deadline. I have the mayor breathing down my back. I have the media. So to her, it was about her.
Right.
And that's how they view when they're dealing with you is, what can you do for me? And so we're of the interpretation of, this policeman is here to help me. He's not. He wants to close that case. He hates you. Most likely he thinks you're not going to amount to nothing anyways. And on top of it, a lot of them think you're an animal.
Right.
And that's just real talk with it. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I feel like with the knowledge of the truth of who we are, going beyond just, okay, we the Israelites, you know, we the real Jews, them people, they the fake people, they not the real people. Now what? Now what is going into the book and reading the rules of conduct of how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And that's the disconnect between the Black church and the Bible. We've grown tired of the Christian message, and we look at that Bible as a waste of time because we've seen our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our moms and dads go into that church, and we see the pastors taking all the money, and we see the pastor sleeping with all the women, and we look outside and we still see murder, gangbanging, and injustice, and we say, what's the point of that Bible? Right. And that's because the preachers and pastors are not teaching you that it goes beyond just saying, oh, I love Jesus. It's, what did Jesus teach? He told you this is how we supposed to behave. Right. That's why when they killed him, they put the sign, he was the king of the Jews, because we had our own kingdom and Jesus was our actual king, that he was our government leader, and he was teaching us how we're supposed to behave in conduct. Right. And that's the part where the Black church is not doing. They doing twerking in the church, and they throwing the collection plate around, they showing up in Bentleys. None of that is in the Bible. What's in the Bible is how you're supposed to conduct yourself and who your ancestors are. Well, and that's why we need to come back to this.
I tell you what, folks, we're here with Real Talk, the Black Boy King, and he's dropping more than jewels, man. But, you know, we're running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and move into final thoughts, folks. Black Boy King, go ahead, bro. Go ahead, you know, good information you're giving us today. Go ahead and let the people know what your final thoughts are in this situation.
No doubt. Final thoughts are, you know, whether people want to believe it or not, man, just open up the book, study the history. The artifacts are there. We live in the information age. You know, you can go on Google, you can get books. There's books that went out of print 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that tell you who you are. You can go get them now, and keep these commandments of the Most High. And holla at me, man. You know what I'm saying? I dropped my album this week. Real Talk, the Black Boy King presents True. Peep that on all the streaming platforms: Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music. Download, support your boy, $9.99 on iTunes, and hit me up on Instagram or Twitter, Real Talk 480. I'll be happy to chop it up with anybody about this, man, because at the end of the day, we got to stop asking why these things are happening and then not doing anything.
Right.
We got to go back and take accountability, find out who we are, and then what we need to do as a people, because we can't rely on our enemy to fix it for us, and that's what we're doing right now. Now, I appreciate you having me on the show.
Listen, bro. Listen, man. I'm glad we finally got it together. Dope interview, man. Dope interview. I'm pretty sure we're gonna have you back on a subsequent show once a couple of the fellas actually see what it is you had to talk about. I'm pretty sure they're gonna have some questions for themselves, and if you're willing to come back, you're welcome, and we'll get you out here and take care of this. But folks, we had a dope show. Make sure y'all check out that youtube.com/reality guru show. Consider subscribing. Listen, and make sure you hit that bell notification. I don't want nobody missing none of this good content. On behalf of my man Real Talk, Black Boy King, I'm G Cleve, Reality Gurus. Y'all take care.
And in the end, it's said and done. And I really hope you find the one. Wild ride, but it was so much fun. Deep hit, so it slowly bun.